Thank you everybody for coming today. My name is Anne Keary and I'm a member of Climate Fast and a supporter of Fridays for Future, the youth climate movement. We are here today to launch the People's Climate Plan. This plan was a collaborative effort between Climate Fast and Drawdown TO. Our plan has been endorsed by CAPE, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, Green Neighbours 21, Just Earth, Greenspiration and Pax Christi. Our plan also reflects the comments submitted by the public during the consultation period on the government's cancellation of cap and trade, 99% of which supported strong action on climate change. It is therefore truly a People's Climate Plan, unlike the government's Made in Ontario Environment Plan, which ignored the public submissions and which does not entail strong action on climate change. We chose today to launch our plan because today is the last day for commenting on the government's plan. Our plan is a comment on their plan and an alternative to it. It is based on science, not wishful thinking. It calls for the actions we need to see to guarantee a safe climate future. To speak to this, I would like to introduce Colleen Lynch, a resident of York South-Western and a core member of Climate Fast, who was heavily involved in the development of the People's Climate Plan. Zoe Keary-Matzner, a student in grade 7 at King Edward Public School and a young activist with Fridays for Future, and Tomislav Svoboda, who is a family doctor and a public health specialist at St Michael's Hospital and an associate professor in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto. This past year, he has been named Regional Physician of the Year by the Ontario College of Family Physicians and is a member of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. Colleen, thank you.
Hello. The people of Ontario know acting on climate change is urgent, that we cannot afford to go backwards. As the IPCC report shows, every incremental temperature increase brings with it escalating threats and costs, like more extreme floods and forest fires. Despite the urgency, the new Made in Ontario Environment Plan weakens our climate goals by 30 megatons, more than the emissions reduced by the coal plant closures. In response, we've created the People's Climate Plan. Matching Canada's current targets as proposed will not keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. In fact, if everyone followed Canada's lead, the world would warm a disastrous 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. Instead, our People's Climate Plan asks that we build on our past success and use that momentum to take strong action, fully consistent with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Ontario's new Environment Plan lacks the backbone of details. It fails even to support its own weakened targets. In contrast, we call for a real climate plan, one with clearly specified actions, timelines, and commitments. For Ontario to do its fair share, we need a plan that not only offers incentives and regulatory changes to industry, we need one that helps us all, families, vulnerable populations, and small businesses, quickly transition off of fossil fuels. The People's Climate Plan proposes a real focus on green transportation choices that are accessible and affordable for Ontarians, including reliable low-carbon public transport, electric vehicles, and active options like cycling. We want policies like reinstating electric vehicle rebates and setting an end date for new gas-powered cars. For our buildings, we ask for a plan that creates jobs and saves Ontarians money. We want energy efficiency programs significantly increased and incentives for building retrofits and adoption of renewable energy restored. We also want the building code modernized now to ensure net zero emissions in new builds by 2030. We want the billions spent on fossil fuel imports and the hundreds of millions spent in subsidies for the industry every year shifted to actions that reduce GHGs and enable a rapid transition to clean energy. The People's Climate Plan proposes that Ontario help skilled workers in construction, manufacturing, and transportation secure long-term employment in clean tech, rather than in polluting, fossil fuel-dependent industries that are unreliable job providers. Moving to green infrastructure now is not just an imperative, it is also a great opportunity. The transition would create thousands of jobs, make our province more resilient, and leave its natural beauty intact for future generations. The people of Ontario are concerned that we preserve and expand our cherished wilderness and green spaces, our most effective carbon sinks. Finally, we ask that public money is not misused. Where is the remaining $500 million that was raised in cap and trade? The social cost of carbon needs to be effectively addressed. We question whether regulations on pollution, partly set by the polluting industries themselves, and with potential exemptions across the board, as stated in the government's environment plan, will be effective. Furthermore, the Ontario Carbon Trust resembles a failed Australian model and lacks specifics. The plan to encourage innovation is also vague. At the same time, funds must be recovered quickly for municipalities and for projects like school and social housing retrofits and community-run renewable energy. Now is the time to counter the threats of climate change with our best and boldest efforts. We propose that Ontario create a real People's Climate Plan, one that sets ambitious goals, outlines a clear path to meet them, and ensures that the people of Ontario all benefit from a greener, fairer, and more prosperous future. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Zoe, would you like to speak?
Hi everybody, my name is Zoe Keary-Matzner. I'm 12 years old and a grade 7 student here in Toronto. I am also a member of Fridays for Future, an organized a movement of young people inspired by the young Swedish activist Greta Thunberg. Greta went on strike from school last year to call attention to the climate crisis, and she has continued to strike the first Friday of every month and call on young people everywhere to do the same. And now we are doing that here in Toronto because, as Greta says, we can't solve a crisis without treating it like a crisis, and it is a crisis. In the recent UN IPCC report, scientists warned government leaders that we only have 11 years left if we are to limit warming to 1.5 Celsius. By 2030, they say that carbon dioxide emissions need to fall by 45%. If we fail to meet these targets, rising sea levels and ocean acidification will drastically alter life on Earth. Heat waves, droughts, rising sea levels, ocean acidification, and will result in loss of marine life, mass extinction of animal life, and significant loss of human life by the end of this century. Climate change is threatening our future. I will only be in my 20s when the 11 years are up. So I am here to tell the government of Ontario, you can either decide to save our planet and our future or not. And unfortunately, this government doesn't seem to be interested in saving our planet, nor does this government seem to really care about my future. I think that this government needs empathy. I can't even vote, so they are responsible for giving me a safe future. They need to understand that what they are doing is having serious effects on the world. I don't think they realize that people are already dying and that so many innocent creatures are suffering. It's not fair that people already suffering from climate change because of government inaction. It's not fair that animals have to watch their young die because our leaders aren't taking their part to stop climate change. This government is failing us. They say they care about climate change, and yet their actions speak louder than the words. Why should we believe they care when the new Ontario Environment Plan weakens Ontario's greenhouse gas reduction targets and will allow for the release of 30 megatons more carbon than the previous government plan? I, along with my friends, wrote a letter to the Minister of Environment, Rod Phillips, asking for a meeting with him to discuss the climate crisis and the government's environment plan, but he has not responded. So that is why the kids of Fridays for Future are issuing an absence slip to the Minister of Environment. This slip reads, "This is a message to the children of Fridays for Future to Minister Rod Phillips. Your refusal to meet with us to discuss climate action, as per our request, has been marked as an absence. This absence is being reported as an offense against democratic and accountable government. We are also issuing late slips to both Rod Phillips and Doug Ford. The late slip for Doug Ford reads, "This is a message from the people of Ontario. The premier of your government, named Doug Ford, was marked late today on climate action. The consequences of this will be lethal heat waves, more extreme weather events, floods, wildfires, extended droughts, and a public health crisis. We wish this was not a joke. Unfortunately, it's not. Thank you.
Tomislav.
Thank you for inviting me to say a few words. I'm here to endorse the People's Plan for Climate Change, a growing and evolving document. We as physicians and medical professionals cannot be more emphatic. Climate change is the greatest threat to global health in the 21st century. It is the greatest threat to global health in the 21st century. This and similar statements have been made and endorsed by top physicians and medical organizations nationally and internationally. The Canadian Medical Association, the Canadian Public Health Association, the World Medical Association, the World Health Organization, and many others. There are a growing list of impacts on human health and welfare due to climate change, and these are being documented. There were 157 million more people exposed to extreme heat in 2017 than in 2000. There were 153 billion labor hours lost due to heat, 62 billion more than 2000. There are increases in vector-borne illnesses and spread of such disease in previously unaffected areas. 30 countries are currently experiencing reductions in agricultural yields. There were $326 billion in economic losses in 2017, 3 times more than in 2016. Right now, world population projections predict that there will be 10 to 11 billion people in 2050, nearly 50% more in the next 3 decades, putting further pressure on limited resources and increases in greenhouse gas-emitting activities. Wars are increasingly becoming wars over oil. They are now erupting due to droughts and predicted to soon be breaking out due to food and water shortages. As physicians and first responders to increases in vector-borne disease, to respiratory illnesses, to food and water scarcity, to the aftermaths of traumatic weather events, rampant forest fires, and wars over disappearing and limited resources, we're telling Doug Ford and other provincial and world leaders that climate change is the greatest global threat to human health in the 21st century. Top greenhouse carbon activities are also toxic to our health. Car-based transport and animal-rich diets alone are responsible for nearly 50% of greenhouse gases. At the same time, driving cars, flying in planes, burning fossil fuels, and eating diets rich in animal products are resulting in obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, and cancer. These are conclusions by top medical scientists in top medical journals. As with tobacco, we can curb these activities through firm action and healthy alternatives. Building the right infrastructure like transit systems, pedestrian areas, and bike lanes will encourage active transport, such as cycling, walking, and taking public transit. Such active lifestyles could result in 25 to 30% reductions in breast cancer, colon cancer, stroke, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and depression. Similar improvements can be expected with promoting plant-based or plant-rich diets. With regard to dietary changes, leading medical studies and top journals are calling for policies to help reduce animal products in Western diets by up to 80 to 90%. It took us 35 years to reduce tobacco smoking by 50% through the courageous and unprecedented actions by the entire country. This included taxes of up to 70% on cigarettes. Contrast that to 4 cents, on the dollar for a liter of gas in Ontario. And the legislation limiting access to cigarettes and where they can be smoked. That's 35 years to reduce smoking by 50%. We now have 11 years to achieve the same reductions in greenhouse gas emitting activities. 11 years to achieve a 50% reduction. As frontline experts in efforts to change behavior on individual and societal levels to improve health, we as physicians can tell you that optional behavior changes, like proposed by Doug Ford, with some incentives, as proposed in Doug Ford's climate plan, does not work. Eliminating price on carbon does not work. Whether it's getting us to quit cigarettes, wear seatbelts, or not drink and drive, relying on education and optional incentives will not work and did not work. All these society-wide changes required legal, financial, and social, structural changes, penalties, and heavy enforcement in the presence of healthier alternatives to work. Education and optional incentives won't work and haven't worked. The OECD, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, as well as leading medical groups are all calling for a price on carbon. We need to pay if we want to pollute. It's one of the positive elements in capitalism. Accountability. We take responsibility for cleanups and alternatives by paying. No free lunch. No pollution gravy train. We just gave Nobel Prizes for these same conclusions. Given our experience with drinking and driving, given our experience with seatbelts, given our experience with tobacco, given our experience with putting a price on carbon and pollution in other jurisdictions, thinking that we can effect massive societal change, 50% reductions in emissions in 11 years without a price on carbon. Doug Ford, what are you smoking? What are we all smoking?
Thank you, Tomislav. Are there any questions? Well, I would like to thank all our speakers for addressing the serious climate crisis that we're in, to repeat the urgency of their comments that we need to address this climate crisis. We have 11 years to reduce emissions by half. It's 1.5 degrees or bust. That's the situation we're facing. As a member of Fridays for the Future, we will continue to be rallying on the first Friday of every month, and we will be rallying again this coming Friday outside Queen's Park at 12:30. And we will continue this action and raise awareness across Toronto and hopefully across Ontario in collaboration and in coordination with other actions that are happening in Canada and across the world to raise awareness of the climate crisis. Thank you. And we are now going to